Have you ever been startled by how a single, ordinary evening can change the entire course of your life? It happened to me one night, quite by accident, when I decided to turn off my television after dinner. For years, I had relied on that constant screen glow for comfort, routine, or just background noise. It felt like an old friend, one that never disagreed, never judged, and never asked for anything more than my passive attention. But one unsettling thought crept into my mind as I flicked the off button that night. Perhaps this friend was quietly stealing more from me than it was giving. I realized how the habit had slowly numbed my senses, how I had let my evening hours slip away without truly noticing. The silence that followed was eerie at first, yet strangely awakening. For a moment, I wanted to switch the television back on, just to restore that familiar noise and stop myself from confronting the uneasy questions bouncing in my head. Instead, I sat in the stillness and felt my heart pound in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I wish I could say it was a calm and pleasant revelation, but it was more like a jolt, reminding me that a deeper life was calling. I caught my own reflection in the darkened screen and sensed the time I had lost, the days, months, and years that had slipped by as I let myself be lulled by programs I barely cared about. Memories of my younger self came flooding back, the woman who used to spend her evenings walking in nature, writing thoughts in a worn journal, or meeting friends for spontaneous conversation. Where had that woman gone? What had happened to that spark, that hunger for genuine experiences? Somehow, I had traded it for the convenience of flipping channels and letting the hours dissolve into static. Little did I know that one moment of switching off the TV would be the first step in prolonging my life, not just in terms of time, but in terms of depth, meaning, and a renewed sense of purpose. Number 1. The immediate rush of unfiltered silence. That evening, I found myself grappling with silence in a way I hadn't felt for decades. At first, it was unsettling, almost suffocating. I heard every breath, every faint groan from the house settling, every distant car passing down the street. My mind began to wander, drifting into corners I hadn't visited in years. I remembered events from my childhood, moments of regret, wishes that had never been fulfilled. It was as if the hush around me pried open all the locked doors in my heart. My usual habit would be to fight this unsettling quiet by turning on the TV, letting the noise drown out my own thoughts. But now I was forced to face them. My pulse quickened. My palms felt sweaty. And in that moment, I confronted a stark truth. I had been using the television as a crutch to avoid hearing myself. Instead of letting panic consume me, I took a slow, deep breath and allowed those thoughts to surface. Yes, they were uncomfortable. Yes, they reminded me of things I wished I could forget. But they also showed me something crucial. I was still here, still alive, still capable of feeling everything from sadness to hope. That rush of unfiltered silence was like a sudden awakening, a jolt that alerted me to my own heartbeat. In that heartbeat, I found both trepidation and an odd thrill. I thought about Margaret, a 73-year-old friend of mine who once told me she never spent an evening alone without her radio or her TV. "It's too lonely," she admitted. Now I understood her fear. True silence can be intense because it reveals every layer of who we are. Yet in that intensity, I realized something vital. I was not just passing time, I was living. I stood up from my chair, feeling a sensation that was a mix of anxiety and exhilaration. A new energy coursed through my body, as if my senses were rebooting. The hush that had once felt foreboding now started to feel strangely liberating. No distracting noise. No commercials. No endless chatter from shows I didn't truly care about. It was just me, my memories, and the promise of all that might still come. In that hour, I recognized how I had let external noise mute the most crucial conversation of all, the conversation with myself. It was time to begin speaking inwardly again. And in the midst of that quiet, I sensed the first step toward extending my life, not merely in the sense of extra days on the calendar, but in giving every remaining day greater meaning. Number 2, waking up to my neglected body. As I wandered through my home that evening, I noticed another unexpected shift. I felt my legs, my posture, and the subtle aches that I had grown used to ignoring. With the TV off, there was no storyline to distract me from the way my joints felt or how my lower back throbbed after sitting too long. It was unsettling. I realized I had spent countless nights glued to the couch, unconsciously snacking on whatever was within reach, barely moving during those hours in front of the screen. No wonder my energy had dwindled. No wonder climbing the stairs sometimes felt like a monumental task. I recalled hearing stories of people who discovered hidden health issues only after stepping out of their routines. It was as if I had removed a blindfold. I started stretching gently, rolling my shoulders, feeling the stiffness that had accumulated. My body seemed to whisper, "Thank you for finally noticing." I remembered reading about a man who, at 70, decided to cut back on his screen time. Within weeks, he discovered that the pains he attributed to old age were partly due to inactivity. That night, I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't ready to give in to the fate of growing weaker by the day. Perhaps I couldn't reclaim the body I had at 30, but I wasn't about to let it deteriorate without a fight. Without the distraction of late-night shows, I felt an urge to move. I did a few simple exercises, noticing how unfamiliar it felt to challenge my muscles. There was a moment of humility in realizing I had neglected this vessel that carries me through life. But that humility also sparked a quiet resolve. I promised myself I would do more than just stretch. I would stand up every hour, walk a little around the house, maybe even step outside for some fresh air rather than let the hours trickle away on the sofa. I recognized that my body, though older, was still a loyal companion. It responded to a little attention with relief and gratitude. In that recognition, I found a renewed spark. If one evening without TV could make me aware of how much I had abandoned my physical self, how many more evenings might help me rebuild strength, stamina, and vitality? Number 3, the unexpected depth of human connection. The phone rang that same night, just after I finished my gentle exercises. It was a dear friend, Charles, whom I had seen less often in recent years. Normally, I might have stayed half-focused on the television while we spoke, barely listening as I flipped channels. But that evening, I didn't rush to turn the screen back on for background noise. I gave Charles my full attention, truly hearing every word he said. Our conversation felt richer, more genuine. I laughed more heartily at his jokes, asked deeper questions, listened for the subtle emotions in his voice. By the end of our call, I sensed we had shared more in those minutes than we had in months of casual phone chats before. Later, I realized that the absence of television had freed me to be fully present. So often, we let half our mind drift away to whatever show or news segment is playing in the background. That half-minded listening seeps into everything. We skim through conversations. We fail to notice the small changes in a loved one's tone. We lose the profound bonds that only come when we are wholly there with another person. That night, with no show beckoning me, I felt truly connected. I remembered times in my youth when I would talk with friends late into the evening, with no electronic intrusions. We'd open our hearts, laugh at absurd jokes, or share our most vulnerable secrets. Realizing how much I had missed that level of connection struck me like a bolt of lightning. My quiet house seemed to echo with possibilities. Maybe I could restore those personal bonds if I removed the static that had been filling my evenings. I started to wonder if the reason some of us feel lonely as we grow older is not because people aren't there, but because we're too distracted to reach out in a meaningful way. That phone call with Charles felt like a step back into authenticity, a reminder that friendships and deep connections can still thrive. I went to bed with the phone resting on my nightstand, determined to call a couple of old friends in the days to come. Maybe, just maybe, investing in real conversation would replenish the sense of closeness that had faded over the years. Number 4, rekindling passions long forgotten. The following evening, I made a conscious decision not to return to my old habit. The TV remained off. I felt tempted, of course, especially when I realized I had a few hours before bedtime. The old me would have switched on some rerun, found a mindless program, and let the night slip away. Instead, I wandered over to a dusty bookcase in my living room. I ran my fingers along titles I hadn't touched in years, half of which I barely remembered buying. My gaze settled on a novel I'd once loved decades ago, but had never found time to revisit. Without hesitation, I pulled it off the shelf and began reading. Within minutes, I was swept into a world that felt both familiar and brand new. It was exhilarating, like greeting an old friend. The house was silent except for the rustle of pages and the soft hum of my living room lamp. My mind felt alive, engaged, and curious in ways I thought had vanished with age. I realized how many of my passions had been overshadowed by the easy lure of television. I used to write short stories, scribbling them into a small notebook. I used to explore local art galleries, sometimes painting my own amateur pieces. But in the glow of nightly TV marathons, these hobbies were set aside, collecting dust like the books on my shelf. I remembered a conversation with a neighbor named Helen, who used to play piano before life became crowded with responsibilities. She had a sparkle in her eyes whenever she spoke of the melodies she once composed. But she rarely played anymore, blaming her stiff fingers and lack of time. In truth, the obstacle for both Helen and me was not the absence of capability, it was a habit of letting hours evaporate. That night, absorbed in a novel's plot twists, I felt a stirring inside, a little tingle, telling me I might pick up my notebook again. I might create something, even if just for myself. By shutting off the TV, I had opened a doorway back into creativity, reminding me that passion doesn't die with age, it merely waits for an invitation to resurface. Number 5. Discovering a renewed sense of purpose. A week passed. I maintained my new routine of silent evenings, or, at least, evenings spent without the constant background chatter of television. Every night, I unearthed something new about myself. I sorted through old photographs, recalling faces and moments I had almost forgotten. I cooked meals with more care and attention, tasting every ingredient, appreciating every subtle flavor. I even rediscovered that small notebook where I used to jot down short stories. As my pen touched paper, it felt as though a dormant spark was ignited in my core. Something profound began to happen. I felt younger, not because my skin was smoother or my aches had vanished, but because my mind buzzed with purpose. That sense of drifting through each day started to diminish. Mornings felt brighter. I had ideas, plans, goals, even if they were modest, like testing a new recipe or writing a few lines in my journal. All of it added up to a sense of vitality. I remembered hearing about older adults who, upon retiring or losing certain routines, sank into apathy. I often wondered if that might be my path too. But this shift, this simple act of turning off the TV, created a space that beckoned me to fill it with meaningful pursuits. On one of these newly quiet nights, I received a letter from a family friend, a younger woman who was struggling to decide her next steps in life. She asked for advice, something I might have previously brushed aside while half watching the evening news. But this time, I wrote back with real care, drawing on my life's experiences. I shared the excitement of stepping out of a comfort zone, of rediscovering passions, of realizing that time is both precious and fleeting. When I sealed the envelope, a wave of warmth flooded me. I felt needed, relevant, and capable of guiding someone else. That feeling was a reminder that life doesn't stop offering chances to grow, to help, and to find significance. Sometimes, it's the simplest changes, like silencing a screen, that awaken that dormant purpose. Conclusion: a new chapter without the glow. As these evenings accumulated, I came to see them as little victories, a choice to embrace life instead of letting it slip away in a blur of shows, commercials, and forgettable dialogues. It wasn't always easy. I had nights when I craved the comfort of flipping through channels to avoid restlessness or worry. But every time I resisted the urge to reach for the remote, I discovered something priceless about myself. I was far from finished. I still had dreams, still longed for deeper connections, still held a wealth of insights that could be shared with the people around me. Turning off the TV revealed that I wasn't simply passing the time, I was shaping it, giving it color, complexity, and intention. All the changes I experienced, a sharper mind, a stronger body, richer relationships, and revived passions, led to a profound realization. By removing a seemingly harmless habit, I created space for life to flourish again. My heart felt lighter, my thoughts clearer, and my days more precious. It was as though I had added years onto my existence, not through a magic elixir, but through a simple shift in how I spent my evenings. I truly believe this decision has prolonged my life. Perhaps it won't give me extra years in the literal sense, though I suspect it might. But more importantly, it gave me extra depth to every moment, an infusion of vitality that nourishes me in a way no television show ever could. Yes, fear still creeps in from time to time. The uncertainty of aging, the apprehension about what lies ahead, those worries haven't vanished. But they no longer rule my nights. Instead, they inspire me to keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep discovering what else I can awaken within myself. So I urge you, with a heart full of new conviction, dare to switch off that TV, even if just for one evening. Let the silence guide you to places you've forgotten or neglected. Open that book you've always meant to read. Dial the number of an old friend. Listen to your body's whispers. Look within for the dreams you once held dear. Tomorrow isn't promised, and letting each day slip by in a haze of mindless entertainment can rob you of irreplaceable joy. Challenge yourself to step beyond that easy comfort. Seek out what stirs your curiosity, your creativity, your desire to live more fully. I share this honest story not to criticize entertainment, but to remind you that life is far richer than we often allow it to be. Sometimes, it just takes turning off one device to illuminate what's been hidden in our own hearts all along. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I appreciate your time, your willingness to reflect, and your courage to consider a life lived more intentionally. Take a moment now and ask yourself, what might you discover if you embrace just one night of quiet? If you feel that same spark I felt, hold on to it. Let it lead you forward. And remember, our time here is a gift. Don't let it fade into static.